The wind howled atop the hill like a warning, fierce and relentless. Dense clouds hung low, as if the sky itself refused to reveal what lay ahead. In the valley below, a heavy silence pressed against the camp. No voices rose, no movement disturbed the stillness. It was not an ordinary day. Something irreversible had happened. The leader was gone. Joshua stood alone, motionless. The news had already spread like fire through the hearts of thousands. Yet he showed no tears, no trembling. He wasn't made of stone, but grief sat in him quietly, deeper than tears. He had walked beside the one who had now departed for years, through barren deserts and under scorching suns, through storms both of nature and of men. Joshua had followed him faithfully. Now the man who had led them out would not return. In the quiet of his soul, a voice stirred. It didn't thunder from the heavens. It didn't arrive with lightning or flame. It came like a breath, gentle, yet impossible to ignore. Rise. The mission is not over. Joshua didn't answer at once. He understood too well what that voice implied. This wasn't comfort. It was a summons, a burden. And the question tore through him like lightning. Could he carry what once rested on another's shoulders? Could the one who had always followed now lead? Back in the camp, murmurs began to surface. Whispers passed from tent to tent. Who would take command now? Who would speak when the river blocked their way? Who would stand firm when enemies surrounded them once more? The promise of a new land lay just beyond their reach. Yes, but it was still occupied. And now their leadership was a question mark. That night, unable to sleep, Joshua climbed a ridge near the camp. He didn't seek signs. He didn't ask for wonders. He just needed clarity. The sky above, filled with quiet stars, seemed to hold more than it revealed. He closed his eyes, and memory came rushing in. He saw again the dunes of the wilderness, the songs of victory after battles, and the cries of rebellion echoing through their tents. He remembered a firm voice that once told him to listen before speaking. He recalled solemn vows, warnings spoken in sacred tones, and those fragile days when hope was only a whisper carried by the wind. And again, the same voice echoed deep within. No one will be able to stand against you as long as you live. Be strong, be unwavering, do not look back. Joshua stayed awake until the sun rose, and when its first light crept over the earth, he stepped into camp with a changed expression. The lines on his face were no longer drawn from sorrow, but from resolution. He walked straight through the tents, past guards and elders, and stood at the heart of the people. They looked to him, not as a servant now, but as a guide. And for the first time he spoke as such. Gather your supplies, prepare yourselves. In just a few days we will cross the river, not by our own power, but because we have been promised. He said nothing of how they would cross. No explanation was given, no plan revealed, only a certainty. Their destination was already theirs, even if their feet had yet to touch it. That truth, simple yet immense, struck the people like thunder. The confidence in his voice did more to steady their spirits than any battle plan ever could. But not everyone shared the same confidence. In corners of the camp, behind closed flaps, skepticism brewed. Doubts surfaced in hushed conversations. Was Joshua truly capable? Could he lead them as the former one had? Some were haunted by past failures. Others feared what they didn't know. But doubt would not delay destiny. The edge of the promised land was near, and time waited for no one. 3 days passed like the ticking of a silent clock. The camp moved in unison, each person fulfilling their role. Men gathered supplies, sharpened blades. Women comforted the children. All knew that a chapter was closing and something unknown was about to begin. Joshua remained calm on the surface, but inside him, thoughts turned like wheels. His eyes often drifted to the horizon, to the river that separated them from the land beyond. It was more than just a body of water. It was a threshold between the past and the future, between memory and mission. What awaited them would test more than his ability to lead. It would test his belief in what could not yet be seen. On the evening before their departure, Joshua summoned the heads of each clan. He didn't speak long, but each word struck with the weight of a lifetime. What lies ahead will not be simple, but remember this: we do not walk alone. Every step from here forward will be remembered, and every choice will carry weight. The stillness of night had returned to the camp. Tents whispered in the breeze. Fires had turned to embers. As all slept, Joshua rose once more, quietly slipping away from the quiet order of the sleeping multitude. But this time, he didn't seek solitude for reflection. He climbed a slope with a purpose: to see, to face the reality ahead. From the crest of a rocky height, he gazed down at the river that marked the boundary of their future. It rushed with might, swollen and untamed. There were no crossings, no crafted bridges or ferries. Only the surging force of nature, a boundary drawn not by men, but by something greater. It stood between them and everything they had been promised. In the deep silence, Joshua whispered a question that had no easy answer. How, Lord? How shall we pass what stands before us like a wall of water? But the heavens did not thunder. No signs unfolded, only the same sound as before, the roar of water beating against stone, strong and unyielding. When he returned to his tent, a lone figure awaited him. Not a commander with news of battle, not a healer with word of the sick, just a messenger with a simple statement. The people are ready. Joshua gave a small nod, not because he had a plan in place, not because he had solved the puzzle, but because he understood something deeper. True leadership doesn't require knowing every answer. It requires stepping forward even when clarity is absent. With the first hint of dawn, a new chapter began, a day that would be remembered long after the dust settled. For although the waters still surged in front of them, something greater had already moved their hearts. Anticipation hung in the air like a weight. No one could say with certainty what would happen once they approached the river, but everyone felt that something monumental was coming. A shift that would rewrite not only their own path, but that of their children's children. Joshua stood before the flowing current. His gaze didn't waver. The river churned before him, deep, loud, uncrossable. There were no solutions from men, no structures or devices to bridge the divide. What remained was faith. What endured was trust. Then came the command, clear, direct, and without explanation. A group, handpicked for their purpose, stepped forward. They carried with them a sacred object, wrapped and reverently handled, known by all but spoken of with restraint. And as their feet touched the edge of the torrent, something extraordinary unfolded. There was no thunder, no blinding light, but the river responded, as though hearing a command only it could understand. The flow began to shift, to stop, to separate. Waters that moments before surged with power now yielded. The people crossed, slowly, carefully, on dry ground. Few could comprehend what their eyes witnessed, but no one denied what their hearts knew. They were not walking alone. On the far side, everything felt different. The soil was rich, the air smelled of growth, verdant hills surrounded them, and in the distance, looming like a silent challenge, rose a fortress city. Walls towered over the landscape. Gates stood shut and unwelcoming. There would be no open invitation here. Joshua, wasting no time, called upon two trusted men. His voice was low but firm, his message without ambiguity. Go into the city, learn its rhythm, discover who lives within and whether they are prepared to face us. That very night the two men set out. Cloaked in secrecy, they moved under the veil of stars, entering the city under disguise. Inside, they found a place alive with activity, yet full of tension. Whispers filled alleys and markets. Word of the approaching people had arrived ahead of them. Fear had taken root, but even the most careful plans can unravel. The spies were spotted. Panic ignited. The gates slammed shut. Guards were dispatched. Escape seemed unlikely until an unexpected figure appeared. A woman, known but not revered among her own people, offered them shelter. Her home clung to the city wall, elevated and discreet. Life had not been kind to her. Yet in her eyes flickered something rare: belief. "I know who you are," she said, her voice steady. "We've heard of your God. Everyone here has. And we know he is not like the others. That's why I ask you this. When you come to take this city, remember my family. We are not soldiers. We only wish to live." The men glanced at one another. Then one answered her gently, "Your faith will not be ignored. Hang a visible sign from your window. On the day this city falls, your house will stand untouched." With her help, they slipped away through a hidden passage in the wall, vanishing into the night. Back at the camp, they stood before Joshua and relayed what they had seen. "The people within are gripped by fear. They've heard of us, and more importantly, they've heard of our God. That place is already trembling." Joshua nodded, absorbing every word. Yet even in the face of this apparent advantage, he hesitated. Before he could plan for siege or attack, something deeper stirred inside him. It was not strategy, not advice. It was something immovable, a truth he couldn't shake. A voice inside him reminded, "Before you conquer, you must consecrate." Before any sword was drawn or shield raised, the people needed to remember who they truly belonged to. The command that followed was unexpected, not a battle cry, but a call to pause. An ancient rite was to be revived, one that had not been practiced for generations. It wasn't just tradition, it was identity. It was consecration, and it would come at a cost of discomfort, vulnerability, and time. The men were told to set themselves apart, to step back from preparations and enter a moment of surrender. The act they were called to perform marked their covenant. It was deeply physical, but even more, it was spiritual. A declaration written in flesh: "We are yours." Joshua hesitated. Was it wise to make his army inactive now, with a fortified city watching from the hills? What if they were attacked while weakened? But a quiet voice whispered once more, not of logic, but of truth. Victory will not come from strategy. It will be the fruit of obedience. And so the camp entered a holy silence. The noise of drills and the clang of weapons ceased. For several days there were no shouts of command or the beat of marching feet. Instead, there was rest, there was prayer, there was stillness. While the warriors recovered from their act of consecration, the city behind the walls did nothing. Fear had sealed their gates. Those inside watched, but did not strike. Even courage can be frozen when faced with the unknown. As the days passed, the people grew stronger, and with their strength came a sacred moment. A meal, unlike any they had known in recent memory. It was not the manna from heaven they had relied on for years. It was the fruit of the land beneath their feet, grain that grew on the very soil promised to their ancestors. For the first time in decades, they tasted something that did not fall from the sky, but rose from the earth they had entered. A silent affirmation: the land was beginning to provide. As dusk fell, Joshua wandered beyond the camp once more. Alone, as had become his habit, he climbed a ridge and fixed his eyes on the city they would soon confront. The walls stood firm and high, defiant and unyielding, a fortress built to resist siege, to intimidate and outlast. His mind raced with possible tactics, angles of attack, weaknesses to exploit, when suddenly he noticed a figure standing nearby. The stranger said nothing, but his presence was undeniable. Tall, armed, still. Joshua stepped forward cautiously and asked the only question that mattered: "Are you with us, or with them?" The man's reply cut through the night like a blade: "I do not stand on either side. I serve the one who reigns above them all." In that instant, Joshua understood. This was no soldier, this was a messenger of the Most High. He fell to his knees, his heart laid bare. "Tell me what I must do," he pleaded. The reply was quiet but firm. "Do not act according to your own wisdom. Follow what has been commanded. Walk, trust, and the impossible will bend." At sunrise, Joshua summoned his commanders. What he described defied every military instinct. There would be no ladders, no siege weapons, no surprise attacks. Instead, they would walk in silence around the city. No threats, no cries, just quiet obedience. The captains listened, bewildered. A few exchanged glances. Others furrowed their brows, but no one raised a word of rebellion. Joshua did not demand belief, he simply relayed what had been revealed. So began the march. Each day, the people circled the city once, silent but unified. Those behind the walls watched in confusion. At first, they jeered. Then the laughter died. Something unseen unsettled them. The quiet footsteps of an obedient people spoke louder than any war cry. On the seventh day, the pattern changed. They did not walk once, but multiple times. And this time, they were told, when the moment came, they would shout, but not before. The signal would not come from men, but from heaven. Then it happened. A single command, firm, thunderous, split the air. Now, thousands of voices erupted like a storm. The sound wasn't just loud, it was charged. A force surged through the ground itself. The mighty walls, once thought indestructible, trembled and collapsed. Not by human effort, not by force, but by something greater. In a moment, what had stood for generations fell into dust. The city was taken. Yet amid judgment, there was mercy. On a window along one of the remaining walls hung a scarlet thread, a quiet promise. Inside that home, a family waited in faith, and just as had been vowed, they were saved. The people rejoiced, overwhelmed by what they had witnessed. But Joshua did not allow celebration to dull their focus. This was not the end. There were more cities, more enemies. The journey continued. The next target was smaller, a town of less stature, less defense. It appeared vulnerable, a simple task. Scouts were sent. They returned with confidence. There's no need to send the entire army. A small force will suffice. But confidence turned to humiliation. The force was defeated. Men were wounded. Some never returned. Confusion and grief spread like wildfire. Joshua was crushed. The commander who had stood strong fell to his knees. His voice cracked as he cried out, "Why, Lord? Why?" Joshua cried out. His voice, usually steady as stone, now trembled. "After all we've done, all we've obeyed, why now do we fall?" The answer came, not in anger but with piercing clarity. Something was taken, something that was meant to be wholly mine. It was hidden. While this impurity remains in your midst, you cannot move forward. Joshua froze. The weight of the failure fell not only on those who had died, but on the entire community. The camp had been compromised, not by external force, but by internal disobedience. A search was ordered. Tent by tent, family by family, the investigation moved with sacred urgency. And then it was found. Beneath the floor of a tent, buried out of sight, was what had been stolen. Devoted things, taken in secret. No one had seen it done. No alarm had been raised. But nothing remains hidden from the one who sees all. The people mourned. The man responsible stepped forward and confessed. There were no excuses, no defense, and justice was swift. Not out of vengeance, but necessity. The camp had to be cleansed. Only then could they move again. Once the transgression was removed, the pathway reopened. The next battle was approached with new humility. This time Joshua did not rush. He paused. He sought guidance. He waited until direction came from beyond him. A divine strategy, as precise as it was unexpected. The army moved not in a straight assault, but in a feint. They lured the enemy out, retreating just enough to convince them of victory. As the enemy chased them with pride, another group emerged from hiding, striking the now undefended city from behind. What had seemed a flight was, in truth, a trap. The victory was decisive, but more importantly, it was instructional. From that point forward, Joshua began to realize something profound. The strength of an army could not compare to the strength of obedience. Numbers meant nothing without alignment to divine will. Victory was not found in experience alone, but in attentiveness to the unseen voice. As news of their victories spread, hope surged again among the people. Confidence returned, though the memory of their prior failure still lingered. Yet Joshua remained vigilant. He would not allow arrogance to poison the camp. He knew too well how quickly success could turn to downfall. And then came an unexpected encounter. A group of travelers arrived. Their clothes were torn, their sandals worn down. Their food crumbled dry, barely edible. They looked exhausted, weathered, foreign. One of them stepped forward and bowed deeply. "We come from a distant land. We have heard of your God, of his power and wonders. We are afraid and we seek peace. Let us make a covenant with you." Joshua studied them. Every sign seemed to validate their story, their attire, their speech, their desperate eyes. Even his advisors murmured in agreement. They're clearly from far away. They pose no threat. But something tugged at Joshua's spirit, a quiet dissonance he couldn't quite name. Yet he did not ask the source for direction. He did not seek counsel in prayer. Trusting what he could see, he agreed. The treaty was sealed. 3 days later, the truth surfaced. They were no foreigners, no weary pilgrims from afar. They were locals, residents of a nearby city, cunning, desperate. They had disguised themselves to avoid destruction, and they had succeeded. Fury spread through the camp. Joshua's own leaders felt betrayed, deceived. He summoned the impostors. His face was stern, voice like iron. "Why did you lie? Why pretend to be what you are not?" The leader of the group spoke with sincerity. "We were terrified. We knew your God fights for you. We knew we would be destroyed. We didn't come to deceive out of malice. We came because we wanted to survive. We don't want war. We want life." Joshua inhaled deeply. He had been tricked, but he had also made a vow. And even a promise made under false pretenses was still a promise. He made his decision. "We will not harm you. You will live, but not as equals. From this day forward, you will serve. You will labor among us, not as slaves of cruelty, but as workers bound to honor the peace you requested." The men accepted the terms without hesitation. Better to serve than to perish. But word of this alliance spread quickly, and not all were pleased. In the capitals of 5 powerful city-states, kings fumed. Gibeon, one of their own, had aligned itself with the enemy. Betrayal in their eyes deserved punishment, and it was clear to them, if one city could switch sides, others might follow. The entire region trembled on the edge of revolt. The 5 kings met in secret council. Their words were laced with threat. "If we allow Gibeon to remain, if we do nothing, we will all fall." They raised their banners, summoned their armies. United by fear and vengeance, they marched. What came next would become one of the most defining moments in Joshua's journey. "We will strike with full force. Gibeon will be erased, and Israel will know exactly what it means to defy us." That was the decision of the 5 kings. Their wrath was not just strategy, it was fear disguised as fury. A city of their alliance had turned. That betrayal, if left unpunished, could spark a chain reaction. They would make an example of Gibeon. They would crush it without mercy. Word of the siege spread swiftly. Dust-stained and breathless, a messenger reached Joshua's camp under the veil of twilight. "Gibeon is surrounded. 5 kingdoms march against them. They've called for help." Joshua didn't flinch. "We gave our word," he said. "Even if the covenant was made under deception, it must be honored. We cannot break our promise." There was no delay, no committee, no second guessing. He commanded his forces to assemble. The march would begin that very night. They would not wait for sunrise. They would travel through darkness, over rough terrain, without sleep or pause. As they advanced beneath the stars, many soldiers wrestled with doubt. Was it truly wise to risk their lives for a people who had once deceived them? But Joshua pressed forward. He understood something deeper. This wasn't merely about a treaty. It was about integrity. It was about showing that faithfulness was not situational. It was sacred. By the time they reached the battleground, the enemy was already in formation. The 5 armies stood like a wall of fire around Gibeon. Their war cries echoed across the hills. Flames from torches painted the sky with angry flickers, turning night into something unholy. And then, with no warning, Israel struck. Chaos exploded across the field. The Allied kings had not expected such a swift arrival. They believed they had time. Time to starve Gibeon, time to fortify. But now, their formations unraveled. Commanders shouted conflicting orders, soldiers scattered like leaves in a storm. Still, the battle was not yet finished. As the enemy fled through mountain passes and narrow valleys, something beyond human hands intervened. From above, the sky opened, not with rain, but with stones. Enormous hail-like rocks began to fall, hammering the earth with terrifying accuracy. The fleeing warriors looked to the heavens and found no shelter. The Israelite soldiers, stunned, could only watch as the very skies fought for them. It was not their swords that brought the most damage. It was the unseen force from above. The earth itself seemed to join their cause. Then Joshua looked to the horizon. The sun was beginning its descent. Night was coming. If darkness fell, the enemy would escape, regroup, recover. The window of victory would close. But Joshua refused to surrender the moment. He didn't command men. He lifted his voice to the heavens. Sun, stand still over Gibeon. Moon, remain in the valley. And the day did not end. The sun froze in the sky, unmoving. The light remained. Time itself paused in obedience to the faith of a man who dared to ask. Some thought they were dreaming. Others believed the world had changed forever. All knew one thing: they were witnessing the impossible. The battle raged on, uninterrupted by nightfall, until there were no more to fight. The victory was complete, not by clever tactics, not by sheer strength, but by divine intervention. The 5 kings, once so bold, fled the field. They hid themselves in a cave, hoping to wait out their fate. But they were found and dragged before Joshua. The leader of Israel did not rush to punishment. Instead, he gathered his commanders. He made the moment a lesson. These men trusted in their weapons, their allies, and their pride. But none of it stood against the one who is above all powers. The kings were judged, and the message rang loud across the land. The war belonged not to Israel, but to the God who led them. In the days that followed, courage surged like wildfire. Stories of the day the sun stood still swept through the region. No enemy dared to rise. Cities began to surrender. One by one, their strongholds collapsed. But Joshua remained grounded. He did not allow triumph to cloud discipline. He knew each victory was not his to claim. Each conquest demanded continued humility. Pride, if unchecked, would become their next enemy. As momentum built, the army divided into 2 fronts, one to the south, the other to the north. Formerly indomitable cities now fell without struggle. The land was yielding, but not because of might, because of favor. With each step, Joshua reminded his people, "This is not our doing." Every stone we walk upon, every gate that falls, every promise fulfilled, it is because he gave it to us. A few soldiers began to believe they were invincible, but Joshua was quick to halt such thoughts. He pointed them back to the lessons of failure, to the sting of disobedience, to the defeat that came not from enemies, but from within. He knew the battle for the land was only half the journey. The battle for their hearts had just begun. Pride was something Joshua never allowed to grow, not in the camp and not within himself. One evening, as twilight painted the sky and the weary army rested beside a recently taken city, a young soldier approached him quietly. "Sir," the youth asked with sincerity, "how many more cities will we take? When will we finally rest?" Joshua looked at him, calm and thoughtful. His voice was steady but carried the weight of years. "When every tribe has received its inheritance, when every promise has been fulfilled, and so They pressed on. No distractions, no delays. Every day was a step closer, but the destination wasn't only land, it was purpose. Yet something had begun to stir within Joshua. He was no longer just a general leading troops. With every choice, every order, he felt the responsibility of a father guiding a nation. His decisions shaped the lives of thousands. His silence carried weight. His gaze was watched. Every movement mattered. At times, he withdrew from the camp, not to craft military plans, but to reflect. In the solitude of high ground, under the quiet watch of stars, he remembered who he had been. Once a servant, unknown, chosen not for strength, but for trust. In those quiet moments, Joshua saw the bigger picture. War was never the end goal. The true test would come in peace. Because obeying during hardship is one thing, remaining faithful during prosperity is another entirely. The miracle of the eternal day had passed, but its echo remained in every story told around campfires, in every cautious glance toward the heavens. It had changed them. Now, as the final warriors returned from distant outposts, the shadows of late afternoons stretched across the hills. Their armor was worn, their weapons dull from use. Their faces carried fatigue, but also triumph. Victory had become their new normal. Joshua stood on a low rise, surveying the fields and rivers ahead. He wasn't searching for threats. This time his eyes saw the land, not as an obstacle, but as an inheritance. Every hill, every valley, every stream, it all pulsed with the memory of a promise made long ago. And now, the moment had arrived to divide it. But before the distribution could begin, there were still final territories to claim. He split the forces into smaller units. Some ventured north, where mountains sheltered proud clans. Others journeyed south to fertile plains, encircled by well-defended settlements. Every path led into resistance. No region surrendered by default. The conquest continued, slow, relentless. Some cities fell quickly, seeing no use in resisting. Others put up fierce defense, but all were accounted for. Each campaign wasn't just a battle, it was a fulfillment. Every flag raised was a thread stitched into the fabric of a divine oath. Then during this stretch of victories, a familiar face re-emerged, one lined with age, but unwavering in purpose. He approached with confidence, walking without assistance, his eyes still burning with fire. "I've waited decades for this," he told Joshua. "You and I stood alone when others doubted. When fear turned them back, we believed. And now the promise is within reach." Joshua recognized him instantly. One of the few who had crossed the wilderness from Egypt. One who had remained steadfast when all others had faltered. "I'm still strong," the old warrior declared. "Give me the land I was promised. Let me face those who dwell there. Not out of pride, but because I believe. With God's help, I will overcome." There was no need for ceremony. Joshua extended his hand. Their shared history spoke louder than any speech. The veteran gathered a small band and climbed into the hills. The fight was brutal, the enemies entrenched, but determination and faith pushed them forward. In time, the land was theirs. That territory, hard-won and rich in meaning, would become the home of his descendants. A lasting testament that perseverance born from faith is always rewarded. As more cities surrendered and the final battles ended, the land slowly transformed, not just physically, but spiritually. Leaders from each tribe came to Joshua with hopeful eyes and open hands. They waited for the moment they'd dreamed of for years. Where would their families settle? Where would they raise their children? What fields would feed their generations? Surrounded by elders and scribes, Joshua sat in the heart of the assembly. Before the people, he began distributing the land, not by chance or personal preference, but with wisdom and purpose. Each portion was assigned according to the story of each tribe, their unique journey, their strengths, and their sacrifices. One tribe was given the wide plains of the west, where the soil was generous and the weather kind. Another was assigned to the rugged mountains, challenging but rich in natural treasures. A third found their place near rivers and lakes, ideal for trade and fishing. As the inheritances were distributed, tribal leaders marked their borders with stones and walked their new lands with family at their side. Some broke into song, others wept. All understood the gravity of what was unfolding. Prophecy was becoming home. Yet not all was without tension. Disputes arose. Some tribes questioned the fairness of their lot. Others expressed concern about neighboring enemies who had not yet been driven out. Joshua stood and spoke, not as a war leader now, but as a father to a restless household. "If you have strength to complain, you also have strength to conquer," he declared. "Those who still face resistance must finish the work. Do not become passive. The promise is real, but it must be protected." His words took root. Tribes rallied, fortified their boundaries, and completed what was left undone. Then, a new command came, not from human counsel, but from the voice that had always guided him: establish cities of refuge. In select locations, special cities were built, sanctuaries for justice. These were not hiding places, but places of mercy and law. Accused individuals could find safety there, to be judged fairly, without bias or revenge. The leaders of these cities were chosen with care. They were to be impartial, firm, and protect the innocent. Joshua reminded them all, a nation's strength is not measured only by its weapons, but by its principles. The people understood. In the midst of their hard-earned peace, the rise of justice brought unexpected joy. After so much bloodshed, the existence of compassion was a sign of something greater. Seasons changed. The land was no longer a dream. Children now played where once swords clashed. Fields were tilled where tents once stood. Laughter, music, and prayer filled the air. Joshua, now aged and walking slower, visited the towns and villages. He did not command as before. He observed. He trusted each tribe to walk their path. Yet he never ceased remembering. When greeted, he answered with humility. He never claimed honor. He simply said, "It was not me, it was the one who led us from the beginning." One morning, as the sun rose behind golden fields, a group of leaders came to him. They wished to thank him, to honor the man who had led them from wandering to home. Joshua listened, then smiled gently. He gave them a final request. "Do not forget. Let not comfort make you forget what brought us here. The trials are not over. Sometimes prosperity tests the heart more than hardship." The leaders nodded, but Joshua knew the future would hold new battles, not of swords, but of soul. As the wind whispered through newly planted crops, Joshua closed his eyes one last time, grateful. His mission had been hard, but worth every step. From the dry southern deserts to the green hills of the north, the promise had been fulfilled. And though a chapter ended, the story would continue.